Alex, I'm starting it.
Good evening. I would like to call the Committee of the Whole Budget meeting of October 11th, 2023 to order. Good evening again, everyone. My name is Greg Reimer, Councillor and Chair of the Budget Committee. I would like to begin by reading a safety notice. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate council chambers to the nearest exit through chamber doors and obey all instructions given. And if assistance is required, please see the clerk in the front here. Once you've evacuated the building, please gather in the front parking lot outside of Town Hall. Also, please ensure that you place your cell phones on silent or they are turned off. And lastly, the Town of Lincoln Council's meetings are posted on our YouTube channel. Closed captioning is available on all our videos by selecting the closed captioning button on the bottom right of the video. Roll call. Members of council are in attendance in person and remotely, with regrets from Councillor Russell. Councillor Njima will be joining us. Clerk? She's online. There she is. We also have staff in attendance. Thank you for coming this evening. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest this evening? Seeing none. Statutory public meetings. We have no statutory public meetings this evening. Number 5, delegations. We have no delegations this evening either. Number 6, our consent agenda. We have no consent agenda items this evening. Bouncing into number 7, regular agenda. We are now considering item 7.1, which is the 2024 budget introduction, phase 2, report FN-12-13. Our Treasurer Charlotte will take us through this presentation. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So tonight, we're here. I want to thank you for being here. I'm very happy to be here to talk to you about Phase 2, the budget introduction. Phase 1, we talked more broadly about our budget process, how we go about it, what the timeline is for it. And tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the levels of government and taxes. This is something that was requested as part of our budget survey, and so when we get that feedback from people that they want a little bit more information about that, we want to try to do that for them. We're going to talk about property tax and property tax rate calculations, some of the challenges, asset management and the infrastructure gap, the funding sources for the capital budget, and some key takeaways. So levels of government and taxes. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list. This is just a general idea that essentially in Canada we have 3 levels of government. We have the federal government, which is responsible for national and international issues like citizenship and immigration, banking, telephones and pipelines. The second level is provincial, which takes care of provincial issues like education, social services, and natural resources. And then third, we have the municipal level of government. So I'm hoping when we get to the questions, you won't ask me too many questions on the last slide about federal and provincial because it wasn't my top subject in high school. But when we get down to municipal, this is really where we're all operating. This is the third level of government. So within municipal government, there can be single tier or there can be a regional or county government with lower tiers. For example, Hamilton is a single tier government. Here in Niagara, we're in a regional government, and the town of Lincoln is what's referred to as a lower tier or a local area municipality. So the region takes care of their responsibilities over the region as a whole, and then each lower tier or local municipality takes care of their responsibilities. So the region, as an example, is responsible for items like policing, regional roads, Niagara regional housing. Like I said, this is not an exhaustive list. There's also things like water and wastewater treatment and all of those sorts of things. And then in Lincoln, I am going to read the full list. There is far more than what's here. We have over 90 services and programs that we do, but we're responsible for fire and rescue, snow removal, sanding and salting of town roads and sidewalks, recreational programs, parks and facility maintenance, community events, museum and cultural services, the public library, municipal bylaw enforcement, economic development and tourism, local water and wastewater distribution, storm sewers, town planning and development, and building permits. And like I said, there's many more, but this gives just a little glimpse of what we do in the town of Lincoln. On top of all of that, which talks about what the responsibilities are, the federal, provincial, and regional governments also affect the town's budget and tax rates. So one way that they impact us is through legislation and regulations. For example, minimum wage rates impact our budget, development charge legislation, housing density targets, and really the Municipal Act, which is brought in by the province, governs everything we do. It provides a lot of guidance. It even tells us how we budget. It tells us that we have to have a balanced budget. It tells us that we can't go into debt for operations and what we can and can't borrow for. In addition to that, we receive funding from upper levels of government, and that also feeds into the budget. So we have the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, Canada Community Building Fund, which used to be referred to as federal gas tax, the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, and then we also get funding from the regions, such as the Combined Sewer Outflow Funding. This little slide shows you that on average in Ontario, according to the Fraser Research Bulletin, people in Ontario pay approximately 46% of their average household income in tax. Of that amount, 26% is paid to the federal government, 16% to the provincial government, and 4% to municipal government. And then of that 4%, about 2.3% goes to the region and 1.7% goes to the town of Lincoln. Now this includes all taxes. When we say 46%, it includes income tax, sales taxes, health taxes. You know, we do have a lot of taxes that we pay in our province for the quality of life that we have, for the services that are provided to us. But this shows you the breakdown of your tax dollar and how much stays within the town of Lincoln. We've talked about this before, so I won't stay here in detail, but when we send out those property tax bills, where do the property taxes go? About more than half goes to the region, 11% stays with the school boards, and 37% is retained in the town of Lincoln. So in 2020, the average household income in Lincoln, according to Statistics Canada, was $121,000. So this would have changed from then until now. Typically it goes up, but this gives us a basis to start at. The average residential home with an assessed value from MPAC of $381,000 would pay $5,168 in property taxes. So I've given the breakdown here between the region of Niagara, the town of Lincoln, and the school boards. And so you can see, similar to the slide that we had before, the rounding makes it work out slightly different. 1.6% of average household income in Lincoln is retained by the town of Lincoln, the lower tier, and overall 4.3% of average household income is paid in property taxes. This slide is an illustration from the BMA Management Consulting Municipal Study that shows property taxes as a percent of household income in the municipalities across Niagara. And you can see here, the average in Niagara is about 5.33% of income. That's the line that's going through the middle of the graph. And then the bar at 4.76% with the arrow pointing towards it is the town of Lincoln. So we're at about 4.76%. That's below the average in the region of Niagara. So I wanted to point that out because I think it's important that we talk about it when we are talking about taxpayer affordability. What is the town doing to try to ensure that our property taxes are affordable for our residents? We don't want to diminish the amount of property tax that we charge people and the fact that they do have affordability issues and they have costs for their day-to-day living. But at the same time, we want to provide context and highlight the fact that we have kept taxpayer affordability in mind, and we will continue to do that. The town uses property taxes and water and wastewater charges to deliver many services, such as the ones that we listed earlier in the slide. So this gives you a breakdown in dollars. A lot of times we talk about percentages. This slide shows you of the average amount of property tax paid in Lincoln for a residential property of $1,902, how it's split up between the different services in the town. $424 for parks, facilities, recreation, and culture. So that's what we're paying per year. Planning and municipal law enforcement, $90. Fire rescue, $203. Library, $103. The capital levy and special infrastructure levy, $289. Legislative, administrative, and general government, $275. Economic development and communications, $98. And public works, roads, and infrastructure, $420. So you can see where we take that $1,902 and we stretch it a long way when you consider all of those services, all of the things that we do, and everything that we provide. And I guess the other part I wanted to highlight on this slide is when you look at items like legislative, administrative, and general government, or even communications, we support all the other departments. So for example, the finance department that I work in, it's categorized under administrative and general, but we process all the invoices for the construction projects, for the public works department, for the fire department, for the parks and recreation, all the different departments to help ensure that we can continue to provide all the services in the town. How are property taxes calculated? The budget process and the budget calculation, it's actually pretty straightforward. We take together all the expenses that we anticipate for the coming year. We subtract all our other sources of revenue, like user fees, grants, investment income. And at the end of the day, that tells us how much property tax we need to raise. Then we divide the property tax revenue by the average weighted assessment value of the properties in the town of Lincoln, and that gives us our property tax rate. Property tax rates work very differently than many other taxes that our residents pay, and so I think it's good to have a little bit of a discussion about that. I went to a session recently where they were talking about the fact that part of why I think people have a hard time understanding why the change in their assessment value isn't exactly equal to the change in their property taxes is because most of us are used to a tax, like for example, HST, where the rate stays constant. So HST is 13%. If our spending goes up or the price of things go up, the amount of HST we pay goes up. If it goes down, the amount of HST goes down. But property taxes really don't work like that. In property taxes, we determine the amount we need to raise, and then we set the rates to raise that amount of money. So the only way the town can increase the amount of property tax revenue that's collected is to increase the budgeted amount of property tax revenue. And this creates a focus on the year-over-year percentage change in the tax that might not always be present with other taxes. So I don't know, but I'm not sure that people take that number, calculate how much HST they paid one year, how much HST they paid the other year, and calculate the percentage change. But because we set those rates, and that's part of our budgeting process, it does cause that to be an area of focus, and that's okay. But it's worth understanding that it is a different type of tax, and the calculation works differently. So what are some of the challenges that we've been facing? And there are challenges that are being faced in the town of Lincoln as well as elsewhere. Recently, the pandemic and the economic after effects have had a significant impact on municipal finances. Many municipal councils paused property tax increases to help alleviate financial pressure on households. And if they didn't pause them, a lot of times they tried to keep them lower to help alleviate that pressure. They also, I know in my experience, they waived penalties and interest. So we did a lot of things to try to help out the community during the pandemic. Post-pandemic, rising interest rates have increased the cost of borrowing. And inflation is affecting our taxpayers, but it's affecting the municipality as well. However, the inflation that we face is a little bit different than the inflation that the taxpayer is facing because they're dealing with their day-to-day spending. We're dealing with items like construction prices as well. So the construction price index is seeing double-digit increases. In 1 year, from Q3 to Q3, it was about 15.6%. And some municipalities are experiencing even 50% increases from what they originally planned for a budget, or even sometimes double the costs. Fuel price increases also impact us. So I know a lot of people are used to going to pay at the pump for their fuel. They know they've seen that increase, but we have a fleet of vehicles that's clearing the roads, clearing the snow, repairing things, and those fuel costs impact us as well. At the end of the day, property tax increases that are below the rate of inflation, including the construction price inflation, can't be sustained long-term, and ultimately they result in decreased services. So the Federation of Canadian Municipalities estimates that municipalities are responsible for 60% of Canada's infrastructure, but only 10% of every tax dollar. So if you think back to that slide that we had at the beginning, we said 46% approximately of income is going to tax and 4% is municipal. That's where that 10% number comes from. Municipalities have limited ways to raise money apart from property tax. So we're always looking, right? I know I can speak for staff and say, we look for grants, we think about user fees, we're looking for those revenue sources, but municipalities only have so many tools at our disposal. We have development charges, but legislation impacts that. So we take those tools and then we try to use them as best we can. Municipalities cannot incur debt for operations. So whereas when we talked about the federal and the provincial governments, they can have a deficit, we're not allowed to have a deficit. We have to budget so that money coming in equals money going out. If we have a shortfall, we have to have a reserve to cover it, and that's required by the Municipal Act. Bill 23, introduced by the province, reduced the amount of development charges that can be collected. And without being made whole, these will need to be funded by the tax levy in future. So we're trying to figure out what that means. We've been told that we would be made whole. We don't know what that means yet. We don't know the exact timing of when we'll know what that means, and it impacts us as well. And lastly, most municipalities have had an infrastructure gap that existed long before the pandemic. So when we talk about that and we look at the asset management planning regulations that have come in, those were introduced years ago in order to try to address this issue in many, many municipalities. So we're not alone. It's not specific to Lincoln. It's an issue that's been existing in the province, and then a plan is needed in order to fill that gap. So what is an infrastructure gap? You hear the term a lot. There's no specific definition. Okay, I'll be honest about that. If you look it up in the dictionary, there's not one thing that it means. But I am going to show you a little video from the Municipal Finance Officers Association. It's going to talk a little bit about the asset management plan, about the infrastructure gap, and illustrate it. I do want to give the disclaimer. It is generic. It's going to talk about the municipality of MFOA. It's not specific to the town of Lincoln when it talks about 90 billion of infrastructure. We're not at 90 billion, we're closer to 1 billion, but it's still a good illustration, so I'm going to turn it over to the video.
Municipalities take pride in providing and maintaining the many services citizens depend on every day, like transportation, clean drinking water, recreation, garbage collection, and recycling. For instance, the municipality of MFOA has approximately $20 billion in municipal infrastructure assets that are critical to delivering these services. These include roads, bridges, sewer and water systems, recreation facilities, and parks. The municipality of MFOA is similar to many municipalities. They're facing challenges because of aging infrastructure. Many of their assets are reaching the end of their life cycle, and there's a need for new infrastructure to service growth. This is where asset management planning comes in. Asset management planning is the process used to help make the best possible decisions regarding the building, operating, maintaining, renewing, replacing, and disposing of infrastructure assets. Simply put, it's all about making the right decision at the right time for the right amount. Municipalities focus on three fundamental goals: providing sustainable services to residents, optimizing municipal infrastructure asset value while minimizing lifecycle costs, and managing risks to service delivery. For example, the municipality of MFOA takes a proactive approach and initially developed a corporate asset management plan in 2014. In 2019, the municipality developed a new policy and updated its plan to meet the new provincial regulation requirements and improve management of all assets. The planning and policy development process provides a clear, detailed picture of our assets, needs, and priorities, which plays an important role in the development of the municipality's multi-year budget. An optimal amount of funding is required to manage current and future asset risks. The difference between the optimal amount and available budget is what we call the infrastructure gap. If the infrastructure gap increases, it will result in inaccessible assets or assets that are not in optimal use. So, we need to balance growth, catch up on overdue maintenance of existing assets, finance the replacement of old assets, and modernize our infrastructure to be better prepared for tomorrow's challenges, while striving to keep property taxes, water, and wastewater rates reasonable for residents. The municipality of MFOA's corporate-wide asset management plan is how they prioritize infrastructure needs to achieve the greatest benefit to the community and to ensure the municipality is a great place to live now and well into the future. For more information on asset management planning, visit MFOA's website.
So I always feel like that guy in the video, he takes what I spend a 30-minute presentation doing and wraps it up in 3 minutes really, really well. But I think that does really summarize, and if you think about the fact that this video was made by the Municipal Finance Officers Association of Ontario, I think it really illustrates the fact that this is something many of us are facing. Okay, so it's something that municipalities are all trying to tackle. We're trying to come up with the best plan. We're trying to face that and find a way, to make sure that we can fund our assets every year. Lincoln is in the process of developing and maintaining its asset management plan. So the asset management plan, it's not something that we just come up with at one point in time and leave it in place. We need to be constantly updating it. It's been done for our fire rescue, road right-of-way, and utilities, and it's still in progress for public and open space. I think the corporate systems is pretty much done, and then corporate fleet is also underway. Lincoln, like most municipalities, has an infrastructure gap, and our asset management plan highlights the importance of investing in our assets at the right time to maximize the tax dollar. So I think it's important to talk about that as well. When we talk about taxpayer affordability, it's trying to make the decisions that are also best in the long run. So sometimes if we were to neglect an asset for too long, it can cost us more in the long run. So we're trying to make good long-term decisions and take the whole life cycle cost of that asset into consideration. The current replacement value, or what's referred to as CRV of our core infrastructure alone, is $581 million, and I should mention that this is in 2021 values. So I pulled this from our asset management plan. It's actually higher than $581 million. I think we know with what's gone on with construction prices between 2021 and now, it's actually significantly bigger. And in addition to this, we have buildings, vehicles, furniture, and equipment, and other assets with an approximate historical cost of $62 million. So because I don't have the CRV information for those assets yet, I at least went into our financial statements and pulled that. So if we took those assets at their historical cost and we tried to pay for them today or buy them today, it's going to be a much higher price. This is what the asset management plan is trying to look at. So it's trying to look at what will it cost today to maintain our assets, because for a long time, all municipalities had on their records was the historical cost. And then we were doing our best to plan and prepare for the future. But as these asset management planning regulations have come in, they've asked us to now start looking at what it's going to actually cost to replace them today. The vast majority of these assets must be maintained and eventually replaced. We want to do this in the most cost-effective manner. Sometimes deferring work on the capital program results in higher repair and maintenance costs in the long run, so we want to invest strategically. Now, I'm an accountant, and so I had to throw in an accounting statistic, even though I know that the CRV information is the most relevant, it's the most current data. But one statistic that we look at in accounting is called the consumption ratio. So it's an indication of how much of the asset's useful life is used up. It can be skewed if you have one big brand new asset or one really old asset or one or two, but overall it's a good estimate. And the Ministry of Municipal Affairs categorizes it as 50% or less is considered low risk, 50 to 75% is considered moderate risk. And so I took a look at our 2022 financial statements and just kind of did a quick calculation, and you can see where our assets are here. So according to those statements, the buildings and components are at about 38% consumed, linear assets 46%, machinery and equipment 45%, and furniture and fixtures 61%. Our total assets are 39%, but that includes things like land, which don't really depreciate in value. But it gives you a good idea. So you can see, if we consider that 0 to 50% is low risk, we're doing I would say, according to these stats, we're keeping things on track, but it does really highlight we don't want to allow things to move into the next category, so we need to keep maintaining and repairing our assets. So what are our funding sources for the capital budget? So I mentioned property taxes for municipality are our main source of revenue. We have only a few sources of revenue for the capital budget. We have development charges for growth-related or development-driven projects. We have the tax levy. We have rates such as water, wastewater, and building department rates, but those rates can only be used for the projects that pertain to their rates. So water rates do water projects. Building department rates can only pay if they have some sort of capital cost. Then we have grants, which for us can be quite significant. And we have donations and other miscellaneous items. That's pretty much it. There could be a couple little things I'm missing in there. Sometimes we have cost sharing and things like that. So then, on top of those sources of revenue, we have tools that we use. Debt and reserves are tools that we use to spread out the cost of the capital expenditure over multiple years, but the funding sources remain the same. So for example, if we have a development charge driven project and we want to issue debt for that project, it means you incur the capital cost, you construct the asset, you issue the debt, and then as the principal and interest payments come due, you pay that with the revenue source. Conversely, if you have reserve funds, for example, if we have tax levy supported debt, we could pay for it in year with the capital levy, or we put away into the reserve fund over time from that tax levy. Then when we want to construct the asset, we construct it and we pay for it out of those reserve funds. So one method, you save up over time, you put it away into the reserves, and then you do the thing. The second method, you do the thing, you issue the debt, and you pay for it out of those sources of revenue, but the sources of revenue stay the same. So it's not a new source of revenue when you use reserves or debt, it's a tool that you use to spread out the payments. So I did a little bit of digging, and we put together this bar chart, and this illustrates what the tax levy and rate-supported capital spend has been over the last 4 years in the town of Lincoln. I've excluded growth, so I've excluded development-driven projects, and I've excluded grant-driven projects. So this is just things that are supported by the tax levy and rates, whether it's reserves or debt, regardless. So the tallest bar in each year, the blue bar, that's what we spent in that year from tax levy and reserves. The second bar, the green bar that's the second highest in each year, that's what we spent excluding debt. So it means the difference between the blue bar and the green bar is debt that we issued funded from those sources of revenue. And then the third bar at the bottom, the yellow bar, that's what we're contributing from our tax levy and our rates every year to the capital program. So when we talk about the infrastructure gap, what we're trying to do is take that yellow bar and start to raise it up. So we're contributing more every year from our operating budget into our capital program so that we can start to fund it at the level that it really needs to stay at in order to be able to maintain and repair those assets. So in the past, a large portion of the spending was funded from our discretionary reserve funds, about $35.6 million over that 4 years, and now they're committed. They're committed to projects. And so to ensure our financial sustainability, the town needs to increase the amount that's being contributed to capital from the tax levy and rate-supported budgets. So what are the key takeaways from this evening? Lincoln's primary source of revenue, like most municipalities, is property tax. The town has prioritized taxpayer affordability, and we will continue to do so. Lincoln, like most municipalities, has an infrastructure gap, and our asset management plan highlights the importance of investing in our assets at the right time to maximize the tax dollar. Inflation, economic, and other factors have increased the cost of capital works and emphasized the need to plan for the future, ensure that we're investing sufficient funds in the capital levy and capital reserve funds to maintain and replace our infrastructure as it ages. And lastly, to ensure financial sustainability, the town needs to increase the amount that is being contributed to capital from the tax levy and rate-supported operating budgets. So I just wanted to close off the recap by sharing the budget schedule. We're in phase 3 and 4 right now. It's happening. We're developing, we're consolidating, we're having discussions. We're trying to compile it all in the finance department and determine what it means. And then in November and December, we'll move on to inform, debate, and approve, where the budget binders will go to council and we'll have our budget meetings. So I'm just going to open it up to questions or comments.
Thank you, Charlotte. Especially the video. I know you do a great job of it too, but the video, it's something we can watch, right? Like we're all addicted to that kind of, got to watch the screen to educate ourselves. Thank you very much. Council, questions, comments on the report from Charlotte? Councilor Murray, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. Through you to Charlotte. Charlotte, excellent presentation. Really enjoyed the color coding. I'm just looking at slide number 22, the one that you just most recently spoke to. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying about the discretionary reserve funds. Earlier, you had said that if something goes, we're not allowed to run a deficit, so if we spend more than we budgeted for, then we take out of our reserves to cover that gap. If we have no money in our reserve funds that is not already committed, how does that work? If we overspend, where does the gap get filled?
Go ahead, Charlotte.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to the councillor. We do have a timing difference on the reserve and reserve funds. So I look at it as the treasurer. I look at the balance that's available that we haven't allocated to projects. If we had a one-year blip, we would have to kind of look at that and make up for the difference in the following year budget. I think that's the approach we would take. But essentially, yeah, I think, I know Councillor Pachariva asked that in one of the other meetings. I think we have some things like winter control and reserves like that I'd like to see us, starting to look at in terms of contingencies. But it's always a balancing act, like we talked about in the slide. So we're always taking all of the needs that we have, taxpayer affordability into mind, and we might have to, make a plan and implement it over time. So essentially, in a short term, we would deal with what we have, and then we would have to address it in the following budget year. But we are watching our budget to actual variance, and I know all of the directors and the departments are watching those budgets, so we're doing our best to stay on track.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody else from council? Any other questions for Charlotte? I like page 22 as well, Councillor Murray. There was a lot of good things on the key takeaways there. Councillor Miklik, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Through you to Charlotte. I agree. Great, terrific report. Very educational. So we as councillors, we're approached by members of the public, residents about affordability all the time. My taxes keep going up. It's getting too expensive to live here. They can only. The average household income is 120,000. You've noted. But at the end of the day, of that 120,000, you're only maybe, let's say I was making 120, I'm only really spending 70 or 60 maybe, depending on my tax bracket. So, when you get a tax bill of $5-6 grand that you've mentioned, like that's a chunk of change, right? So, people advocate. People, they meet, they contact their closest political contact, which is us. Who do we advocate to? Who's going to advocate for the taxpayer to the federal and provincial levels when, who's going to do that advocation? To say that we're paying too much and the people are tapping out. They're getting tapped out, because at some point the increases, they just keep coming. And at some point, the general public, they're not going to be able to pay anymore, and we're going to have to cut services, unfortunately. And who does, so backing up the bus, who is advocating on behalf of the taxpayer to the federal and provincial government?
Charlotte, you want to tackle that? The CEO said he'll come and pitch the 9th, he said, if you need it, so.
Through you, Chair, to the councillor, I'm going to lob this over to the CAO to answer about advocacy to upper levels of government.
Through you, Chair. So, Councillor, I think it's an important question. I mean, the advocate, to your point, and when you introduced the question, you talked about we're the ones that often get the calls. We're the ones that are closest to residents. And by we, I say both staff and council. So that advocacy happens here. I know both councillors, Russell and Reimer, have two motions coming forward that look at the various elements of going to senior levels of government, specifically the province, and starting to talk about some of the things around our capital program, around making us whole, and those other pieces. But the advocate is us. We were having this conversation earlier in terms of collectively, though, municipalities need to get together. Toronto recently received a huge infusion of monies. Obviously, Toronto is a juggernaut, the third largest government in the country. And so when they make a request, when they ask for something, they often get it. But I think collectively, we try it through AMO, but municipalities across Niagara, and I would say across the Golden Horseshoe, who are experiencing similar issues, need to get together and start that advocacy. So it's not going to be just once. It's not going to be twice. It's going to be continuous. I think we can call our MPPs, we can call our MPs, we can encourage residents to do that in terms of where that happens, but really we're the carriers of that message. And, not to repeat what Charlotte said, but taxpayer affordability is front of mind for us. At the end of the day, though, there is one taxpayer, and so I think sometimes we say, well, let's go to senior levels of government. There is one taxpayer, and so when we look at affordability and the challenges we face across our various communities, whether they're federal, provincial, or municipal, there is a requirement, and I think it's incumbent upon us to start looking at what we can do. You're right, we do have to have trade-off conversations, and we do have to prioritize, and I think that's what this budget moving forward will do, and what most budgets look to do. But there are external challenges beyond just the province, and I would say beyond the country, that are driving some of these challenges. 3 years to get a truck delivered, for example. We were talking today as a corporate leadership team, we're deliberating the capital program so that we can start bringing it in front of you. When you have a 3-year delivery cycle, that you need to order something now for 3 years from now, those are difficult conversations, and the ability to anticipate or be anticipatory, I think, isn't always easy. So you're right in terms of that advocacy. It starts with us, but we need to continue to hammer that over and over again, loudly.
Councillor?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that response, and I think that's maybe something we should schedule for the next AMO meeting, that, times are getting Oh, they're getting tough for, not everyone, but for some. It's challenging. And there's that 120,000 average household income, but not everyone's on the high end of that. And those are the people I worry about, at the lower end. Another question I have through you, Chair, to
Go ahead.
Charlotte, is the province, various levels of government, they're expecting us to fund or support growth. This growth is costing a lot of money for us to provide new infrastructure towards growth, which ages for us to only have to repair and maintain and upgrade. Are we obligated by the province to spend this money on growth, even if we may not necessarily be able to fund that growth without having to increase levy or wastewater tax, water and wastewater tax bills?
Charlotte?
Through you, Chair, to the Councillor, so I'm going to get a little bit theoretical here. The theory of development charges and growth. So what should be happening is that when you have a growth-oriented project, you put that in your development charge background study. And the development charge background study helps us calculate how much we should be charging to each developer when they're taking out their building permits or when they're doing their development. So then when you have those capital costs at first for that growth and new development, you would use the development charge revenue to pay for that, so it's not being paid for by the taxpayer, by the existing taxpayer. Then, in terms of your question about what happens when we have to maintain it and replace it, in theory, what happens is now you actually get the growth. So you've collected those development charges, you put in the infrastructure, you've put in the water mains and the roads and the parks and all of those things. They've built now a subdivision or a community. Then we have more people moving in. They're paying property taxes, and then that helps to pay for the maintenance of it. So in that theory, growth does pay for growth. The developers pay for the upfront infrastructure costs of putting in all those assets. And then with time, as you build that development, they pay to help maintain and continue operating the municipality. I did mention Bill 23. Like I said, that did put some restrictions in terms of how much we collect. We're still really, like I said, trying to determine what the impact of that is. We've been told we were going to be made whole. We don't really know exactly what that looks like or when we'll find out. So that's the only disclaimer I would give to that, but that's really, I think, the promise that's been made to us still to this point is that we would be made whole. And so in theory, that's how growth pays for growth. So it should not be on the taxpayer, it should be on the development community and then on those new people as they become part of the community.
Thank you very much. And
Councillor? Mr. CEO has some words too.
Oh, good.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, I think the other piece that I don't want to get lost here is the importance of, with people come industry, with people come economic development, and with that comes jobs. And when we look at the success of a community, when we look at shifting that residential tax, or that tax base away from residents and onto businesses, those are positive things. Those are what help communities invest. Those are what help communities grow. And so I think when we look at the importance of economic development on things like inflation, on things like our financial success, they're essential. With people and growth comes that other side of the coin. And so oftentimes we're looking at both of those, shifting away from that residential tax base burden to the industrial commercial tax base is a positive thing for us. But it's all interconnected, I think, is at the end of the day, Chair, what I'm trying to say.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor?
No, that's good, but I think again, like, towards advocacy, this Bill 23, I'm not sure what other municipalities are thinking about this. I don't know how they're going through their budget deliberations or their budget forecasting when I still feel like there's so much in the air. And I respect the work that you have to put forth through this. And it is challenging, and always thankful to have somebody that knows more about what they're doing with money than myself. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brunet, I saw your hand up before. Were you just waving, or are you good? Sorry, you're on mute, Tony. Councillor,
Yeah.
there you are.
I'm good, Chair. I'm good, Chair.
Okay. Mayor Easton, Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add a little bit more from the regional perspective in terms of the question that Councillor Mikulik was asking. One of the biggest issues that we're being faced with this year is the downloading of development charges out of Bill 23 directly to the levy, which is unheard of because it throws your explanation and that theory out the window. Because it's at the moment, until there is some reconciliation of whatever making us whole means, we are confronted with some DCs going directly to the levy. There's also an expectation, and I was in the room when this was said, so the question was asked, and the Lord Mayor from Niagara-on-the-Lake and I were in the room, and the request was made for municipalities to front-load the development charges. In other words, to hold on to, to basically create that space so that they can go ahead and do their work but not have to pay development charges to us until they get further. And I made it very clear that that was some kind of a pipe dream to think that municipalities in any part of the province could do such a thing. So I agree with Councillor Mikulik, but I don't think we should be waiting till next year. We should be doing this now. It's being done on our behalf by FCM vigorously, and we've certainly sent our documents in as a municipality when they've been requested. It's being done by AMO vigorously as well. There's a continued committee that looks at Bill 23, some of the other legislation, and so information goes forward. But I believe that this is really coming to a head now because no municipality could possibly turn their financial planning upside down to respond to the current situation. So think about where we were at when we brought our development charges in line. We were first in line of all the municipalities in Niagara. We increased them. I believe we increased them 40%, which is exactly where they should have been at the time. We're all familiar with that evaluation process that goes on. We even had time to do one revision, and then we got into the current financial challenges. So it is a very, very difficult hit, but it is being seen now as a form of downloading, and it's not one that municipalities are prepared to accept in the short term or the long term. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor Easton. No other questions? Mr. CAO, did you have some closing comments that you wanted?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, I don't think there's much to add. We're going to be in front of you again. We're going to be talking about our capital budget. We're going to be talking about operating. I think, I'll repeat what I think has already been said, and that is balancing taxpayer affordability with critical infrastructure investment needs. And that is something that we started having conversations with a number of months ago. And a lot more detail today as a corporate leadership team, and I think in the coming weeks and months, we're going to be in front of you with a capital program that speaks to that. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. Thank you, Julie. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Murray that we receive and file for information report FN-12-23 and associated presentation regarding the 2024 budget introduction, Phase 2. I'll now ask our clerk to open the vote. Julie?
Thank you, and that vote is open. Yes. And I'll close the vote. And that carries.
Thank you, Julie. Number 8 on our agenda tonight, confidential items. We have no further confidential items. Number 9, committee remarks. Any committee remarks this evening from council? Seeing none, There being no further business, I call this meeting adjourned at 6:50. Thank you. Good night.